Good morning and good afternoon. Thanks for joining us and welcome to this webinar series, Step by Step, the Higg FEM Verification Trail. Today we have come to the second webinar for the section 3 of the Higg FEM, the Energy and Greenhouse Gas section. My name is Karin Ekberg and I'm the CEO of Leadership and Sustainability. And I have a long experience. I have worked at adidas. I was responsible for environment globally, but I have had also other sustainability oversight positions. Yes, you see my picture here. Just a question, can you hear me well? Please could you send me a message in the question box. And here you can see how to deal with the GoToWebinar control panel. All of you are on mute today because we have a very large audience today and we want to make sure that we have the best audio quality that we can get. Please feel free to send us your questions throughout this webinar and we will try to respond to as many as possible. We didn't succeed in responding to all questions yesterday, but rest assured, for those of you who joined yesterday, you will receive the responses to the additional questions. And the same we will do today. You will receive in an email as a follow-up, you will receive the presentation deck and the recording after this webinar. So please feel comfortable about that. You will receive the documentation. And let me just now check. Yes, you can hear me well. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so also just a reminder, this is copyrighted material. And let's go to the agenda for today. So we will give a very brief overview about the verification trail and purpose. Then we will dive into the section 3, energy and greenhouse gases. And we will walk you through each and every question in that section and what is required to respond with a yes to those questions. We have also added some new material. So we will be speaking also about science-based targets. And we have a lot of examples for you on how you can save energy. And then, of course, we will have time for questions and discussion as well before we close. All right, so the verification trail and its purpose, it's here to support you to better understand the Higg FEM and the requirements within the Higg FEM and help you to improve your performance and, of course, also to prepare you for your verification if you are planning to verify. And here you see the steps in the verification process. So just briefly, for those of you who joined yesterday, you have already heard this. You complete your self-assessment first, you engage a verifier. The verifier needs to decide if, for example, a chemical specialist is needed for the verification. And then you make your self-assessment available to the verifier. So you need to have both the FEM and the VFEM. Both modules are needed if you want to go for verification. The verifier reviews documents and send you an agenda ahead of the verification. The verification is taking place either on-site or off-site in those COVID times. And then, of course, there is also a closing meeting and a reporting. And you can see that there is additional guidance available as well for on-site verification specifically and also for off-site verification. And then just some general advice, please have one person who is responsible for the coordination of completing the self-assessment. That makes it much easier for you to keep everything in one hand, but obviously you may need a larger team to respond to all questions. Read the How to Higg guidance. It's very rich on information and guidance and help. So please consider and dive deep into the How to Higg guidance. You can find a lot of information there. And then please respond accurately to the questions. So take the time to understand the questions well. It is worthwhile because it will save you time later if you understand the questions correctly and what is really needed and asked for. The documentation is important. Targets and baselines, and we will speak a lot about targets and baselines today, and then also be aware of the time needed. And of course, we are here to improve our performance. So we really want to set goals year by year and improve every year. And here an overview again of all the sections that we have. And today we will cover the energy and greenhouse gas section. So let's have a look at this third section. The largest man-made sources of air pollution and greenhouse gas derive from energy production and energy use. Taking climate change as the most severe human, environmental, and economic risk into consideration, governments may impose more stringent requirements and regulations. If your facility reduces its energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, it will help to reduce its exposure to regulatory risks and requirements, but it will also help save costs. And remember this, the energy aspect is actually the one that is most easy to find a business case, usually. So saving energy always saves costs as well. So if you can reduce your energy consumption, you will also reduce your operating costs year by year. If you save 2% today, you will be saving those 2% each and every year into the future, and perhaps even more, since energy costs will increase, of course, also over time. And so, just as an overview of this section, we want here to track all energy and fuel sources. We want also to understand which factors that contribute most to the energy use on site. So is it the sewing machines? Is it the dyeing department? Is it the printing department? Which specific machines use the most energy? And this is, of course, important in order to understand and decide where you want to set your targets to improve your energy consumption. Then you will set normalized baselines. I would suggest using normalized baselines, but you can set absolute baselines as well, and the same for energy reduction. And we will talk much more about that soon. You should, of course, also have a detailed action plan. And this is a reminder to all of you who are working on your action plans. Please make them very specific and very detailed and follow up on them regularly. And we see a lot of very weak, actually, action plans, to be quite honest. And then, of course, you should always seek then to reduce your energy consumption against that baseline. And now let us look at the three different scopes that we are talking about when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. So scope 1, those are energy sources that you are using directly in your factory. So you are burning coal, you are burning natural gas, you are using petrol, diesel, fuel oil, biomass, solar photovoltaic, you are generating yourself, your energy there, and geothermal, hydro, microhydro, and also wind power, which is most probably not so common in a factory location. And then yes, you have information in the greenhouse gas protocol. So in the greenhouse gas protocol, there is a lot of information about how to report and how to calculate on all your different energy sources. And that's scope 1. Scope 2 is energy that you are using on site, but it is generated externally. But so it's owned, the source itself, the original source is owned or controlled by another entity. For example, purchased electricity, purchased chilled water, or purchased steam. And here you see a lot of machines and equipment that may be used in your factory: boilers, compressed air system, motors, generators, HVAC, incinerators, chiller and burner, dryers, lighting, production equipment. So those are just examples of machines and equipment that you may have in your factory. And now an overview of the greenhouse gas emissions, scope 1, 2, and 3. So on this picture, you can see scope 1. Those are the direct emissions. We were talking about them, petrol, diesel, coal, oil, etc., that you are basically where you are using, generating the energy you are using directly from those. So, for example, you are burning oil in your boiler. And then we have scope 2, the indirect greenhouse gas emissions. Most often those are electricity, but we also talked about chilled water and about steam that you may be sourcing, so to say, from outside your own factory. And then we have scope 3, and those are all other indirect emissions. And you can see the arrows here, quite a lot of different indirect emissions, upstream and downstream. So upstream, for example, it can be business travel, employee commuting, leased or rented assets, transportation, and downstream it may be processing of sold products, use of the sold products, end of life of the products, and again also transportation, of course. So scope 1, 2, and 3, please keep this in mind. This is important also for the last questions that we have in this section. And you will also see that you will get a calculation of the greenhouse gas emissions for both scope 1 and scope 2 automatically from your system when you are using the tool. So in your dashboard, you will be able to see the total amount of greenhouse gas emissions that you have. Okay, so what are the benefits of calculating your greenhouse gas emissions using the Higg FEM? Well, you can help reduce energy cost, so it is a significant business case to reduce your energy consumption and therefore also your cost. Thereby, you can also increase your competitive advantage. You can get a start on future regulations on carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. And then, of course, in general terms, also environmental stewardship is also important. And let us look at this section. So you can see we have the questions distributed level 1, 2, 3. And at level 1, you have only one question. So it's really very simple. You need to know all your energy sources and you need to know your consumption of those energy sources. If you have this in place, then you actually already earn your 25. No, you actually earn 50 points here because level 3 questions are unscored, which means that at level 1 you have 50 points available, and at level 2 you have another 50 points available. So this is an easy question, and of course this is the absolute minimum that you should be able to do. Then at level 2 you have several questions here, and it is all about improving your performance and reducing your energy consumption. So all these questions are all about just reducing your energy consumption. And then at level 3, we have a question about scope 3 emissions, and we have one new question, about science-based targets. But as I mentioned, at level 3, those questions are unscored. For now, they may get scored later in later versions of the Higg FEM. So let's go to the question number 1, tracking energy sources. And you need to know your energy source. You need to be tracking it. You need to know the quantity of your energy use, the method, and the frequency of measurement. And this question as such is not new in the Higg FEM 2020, but actually there is a lot of additional guidance given related to this question, and some of the follow-up questions, some of the questions that you will be responding to in a table online, we will have a look at that later, are also new. So the intention of this first level is that the measurement of all energy sources allows you to analyze your biggest energy drivers, detect also any abnormal consumption, year by year, for example, and of course then to define your baseline, set your targets, and improve your performance. For this question here, you will receive full points if you are completely tracking all sources of energy that your facility uses. And you will receive partial points if you're completely tracking at least one of your energy sources, but are not yet tracking all of your energy sources. Yes, so if you have all of them, you will get the 50 points. If you have at least one, then you will get 25 points here. And so here is now additional information. And you will see this in the other sections as well, in the energy section, in the water section, and in the waste section. Here we have received a lot of additional guidance from SAC regarding the quality of the data reporting. And the guidance is similar between those three sections, but we will, in this, today we will go through these requirements quite at a detailed level. So there is some additional information here, and there are principles that should be applied, and those principles come from the greenhouse gas protocol. So the completeness is one principle, and the tracking and reporting program should include all relevant sources as listed in the FEM. Sources should not be excluded from data tracking and reporting, but should be based on, unless they are based on materiality, that they are very, very, very small quantities. And then accuracy. Ensure that the data input into the energy tracking program is accurate and is derived from credible sources. Meters, for example, engineering estimates. And then consistency. Use consistent methodologies to track energy data that allows for comparisons of energy use over time. If there are any changes in the tracking methods, etc., then those should be documented. And then we have transparency. All data sources, assumptions used, and calculation methodologies should be disclosed in data inventories. So you should be able to always explain exactly how you have done your calculations or your estimations. And then regarding data quality management, quality assurance activities should be defined and performed on energy data. So those principles, they are really important, and they are derived from the greenhouse gas protocol. And then regarding the data quality checks, there is also some do's. Review the source data, compare the current year with historical data, ensure the most recent and updated versions of data tracking spreadsheets are being used, ensure the proper units are reported. So if you are working with different types of units, make sure that the conversion is done correctly. And of course, in the Higg FEM, you can report with many different units. So you don't need to use kilowatt hours, for example. There are other also units that you can be using. Then review any assumption. And you should not report data that is not accurate. You should not report estimated data if it is not supported by verifiable and reasonable accurate estimation. So you should not just, put up a finger in the air and say, yes, I believe I consume here 5,000 cubic meter every year. Cubic meter, I mean, of course, kilowatt hour. And then how this should be verified. Verifiers must review all aspects of the facility's energy tracking program. So this is something we were doing previously as well, but the requirement is now much clearer communicated. So we should look at the initial data collection processes and data sources. For example, the invoices that you have or the meter recordings that you have, the process and tools used to aggregate the data. And if any inconsistencies or errors are noted, the reported information must be corrected. And so, again, when it comes to data reporting, please set up a process from the beginning and use that same process year over year. And I really recommend you to have like one large Excel table for all, even for energy, water, and waste, perhaps for air emissions as well. Or if you have separate tables, still make sure you have a clear structure in them. Make sure you have all your data included there year by year, so that you can also compare inconsistencies between year for year, or even between month and month. But also all the calculations you do, when you calculate your baselines, for example, when you calculate your target follow-up, keep all those calculations in one table so that you have everything in one place. It makes it so much easier for you, believe me. Okay, and then the next question is, and now we are already at level 2. Has your facility set baselines for energy use? And your baseline, and you can see what it looks like here. The baseline is the starting point for your target setting. So if you don't have a baseline, you don't know what you should compare with. Your baseline is, for example, could be 2019, could be also 2020. But of course, if you want to measure progress already in 2020, the year that you are reporting on now, then you would need to have a baseline in 2019 to be able to compare. And so you set the baseline once, and usually you use it for a few years moving forward, perhaps aligned with the long-term environmental strategy that we were talking about yesterday. And then I want to show you also, because very often with the energy consumption and comparison year by year, it makes sense to normalize the baseline and hence also the target. You may work with absolute values, but if you have changes in your production, one year perhaps you produce 10% less of your products than what you did in the previous year, you will also have a reduction in your energy consumption, but you didn't do anything really to save energy. It is just because of the production volume. And then it doesn't really make sense to communicate that as, and you are not allowed, according to Higg FEM, to communicate that as a saving. However, if you relate your energy consumption to the actual production volume or shipped products that you have, then you have a much more stable KPI, which will much better reflect the actual saving activities you do, so the measures you take to actually reduce your energy consumption. And here is a very simple calculation example, very, very simple. So we have, you measure the total energy use you have in a given time period. And in this case, it is the annual, we have the calendar year. So you have then 2019, the energy consumption you had in 2019. And you would, of course, also do it by energy source. So in this case, for example, electricity. We consumed 1 million kilowatt hour. And then you divide by the chosen variable that you have. For example, the number of garments per year, the square meter of fabric or the meter of fabric per year, or we talked yesterday about the standard allowed minutes. The standard allowed minutes could also be a number that you divide by. In this case, we have chosen just the production volume, 500,000 garments. And so 1 million divided by 500,000 garments means 2 kilowatt hour per garment. And this example is not so realistic, really. We have just taken those numbers in order to have a really simple example. But this is the way you do it when you calculate normalized values. When you calculate the normalized baseline and when you calculate the normalized target. And you can use that same formula also for the water section and for the waste section. So it's very simple. And that way, when your production goes up or down, your energy consumption will also go up or down, but your normalized value will stay more constant. Yesterday, we talked about the standard allowed minutes, and this is something, a unit that is very helpful when you have very different products that you're producing and they are changing over time. So perhaps you have, you produce underwear and t-shirts, but obviously the underwear is much more, is produced much faster. So if you would only produce underwear, you may produce, let's say, 20 million pieces a year. If you would only produce t-shirts, perhaps you can only produce 7 million pieces a year. And obviously then if the ratio between those two change, then you will have very different energy consumption, and that is where the standard allowed minutes is helpful. So you will soon receive also the presentation from yesterday, and so please go there and have a look again at how that calculation is being done. And of course, as I said, you don't have to use normalized values. You should use the values that are best for you, absolute or normalized, but you should take a decision once and then continue with that decision. And if you choose to work with normalized baseline values, then your targets should also be normalized, of course, because otherwise you cannot compare. So it doesn't make sense to have an absolute baseline and then have normalized targets, or vice versa. Okay, so then the next question is about knowing which processes or operations that use the most energy. So does your facility know what facility processes or operations use the most energy? And if you respond yes here, then you will get a few follow-up questions to respond to. So the intent here is that you are able to evaluate your energy use and that you know where is the most energy being consumed in my factory, because obviously that is where you want to start when you reduce your energy consumption. You don't want to start in the areas where you are using, relatively seen, only a small amount of energy. And for example, you may need to map out your processes and your installations and your machines in order to do this. Perhaps you have a lot of meters, electricity meters, for example, in your factory. Then it is quite easy to do this analysis. If you don't have that, you can also look at the installed capacity that you have. So, for example, the installed kilowatt hours that you have per machine or per installation, and then you have an idea of how much you would be consuming. And of course, you need to take into account how much you are operating those particular machines. So you may have a machine that perhaps has a significant installed kilowatt hour capacity, but you are using it only very, very seldom. So perhaps you are not using so much energy for that machine to operate it in total. But this is important so that you can set the targets where it really makes sense. And yes. And then the next question is to set target. And here we have a small change in the question this year. So has your facility set targets for improving energy use? If yes, select all sources of energy for which your facility has set an energy or greenhouse gas reduction target. So last year, the question was only about reducing your energy consumption. And now we also have that question about greenhouse gas reduction. And you need to cover here at least 80% of the total. Sorry, here is the table where you insert the information. So you need to have you need to cover at least 80% of your total energy consumption in order to get a full score here. If you don't do that, then you will get only half the scores. So, but it still needs to be between 50 and 79%. And the formal target should include, of course, a formal evaluation of the improvement opportunities and actions. So there is one step in between the question number 3, where you look at where you have the most, the biggest energy consumers. And then, of course, you need to evaluate for those biggest energy consumers, where do I have the possibility to change motors, change machines, etc., or in other ways reduce my energy consumption. So it should be based the target on a formal evaluation of the improvement opportunities. Define the exact target quantity. You need to decide if it's absolute or normalized, and you need to have a start date and an end date, and of course the correct measurement units. And also, you need to ensure that the target is relevant to reducing the site's energy use. Yeah. And we have some additional guidance here from SAC. You need to review the target to ensure all aspects are covered. You need to enter the targeted reduction or improvement as a percentage. You need to select absolute or normalized. You need to provide sufficient details on how the target will be met. There is a description field, a comment field where you can add those descriptions. And this is also very important. So please don't just set a target and then don't do anything about it. You need to be clear about what the measures are in order to reach it. And do not report a target that is not accurate. Don't report a target that is based on insufficient data. And don't report an estimated target if it is not supported by verifiable and accurate estimation methodology and data. And now we have this additional question. This is still question number 4. And this is about the greenhouse gas emissions. So if you have set a greenhouse gas target, you can add that information here. And then we come to the implementation plan. And here you have a sample implementation plan. You can use this or you can use your own table, but it is really important to have a good implementation plan for your energy savings. And it should be a plan that is being managed on a monthly basis at least. So, for example, if you have monthly measurements of your energy consumption, then you can every month you can check, are we on track with our savings programs? And then that's fine. You can continue with your program. If you are not on track, of course, you need to implement measures in order to be on track again. And then the next question, number 6, is about demonstrated improvements. Has your facility improved energy consumption compared with its baseline? And if yes, select all sources of energy that have been improved. And this question relates now to the last calendar year. So it compares with your values then in 2019. So because now you are reporting for 2020, so did you make any improvements compared to your consumption in 2019? And here you will achieve full points if you have achieved savings for at least 80% of your total energy consumption. And you will receive half the points if you have achieved it for 50 to 79%. So always in those cases with the quantitative measurements, etc., and target setting improvements, there you will always get credited for covering more than 80%. There you get full score, and for 50 to 79%, you will get half the scores. And the demonstrated performance, we will ask to see all the items below and how they have been calculated. Please keep all reports in Excel. And you should, of course, also indicate the unit of measure. And then one additional question is here. You should also report your percentage change to track the progress. So that's new, and you can see the screenshot here. And again, we have a lot of additional guidance from SAC. You should review the improvement data to ensure that all aspects are covered and that the information is really accurate. You should enter the improvement quantity either as an absolute or normalized value. So for a reduction, for a saving, you should enter a minus, and if it has increased, you should enter it with a plus. It should be a plus there. And then you need, of course, to select the appropriate units for the improvement. And yes, here we can see here. So -5 and a plus. It should be a plus here. I'm sorry for that. Should really be a plus here, like that. Okay, and then you need to provide sufficient details in explaining what you did in order to improve this or make this improvement. And you should not report improvements that are not accurate, report improvements that were not achieved in the FEM reporting year. So you should not list improvements that you were doing in 2019 or 2018, only the improvements that you had in 2020. And you should not report an improvement that is absolute and relates to a decrease in production or reduced facility operations. So this is why the data normalization is important. So remember, we talked about that with the fluctuation. If you produce much less volume of products, then your energy consumption will also be reduced. But that is something that you shouldn't then report as a saving. And also insufficient data, of course, is also not okay. And then this will be verified. Yes, sorry. Let me see. Yeah, we are here. How this will be verified. So again, our verifiers we are put more under scrutiny here. We need to verify all supporting evidence to verify that the reported improvement quantity is accurate. And we should also have a look and understand the implemented changes or actions taken to achieve the improvements. And if there are any inconsistencies or errors, the reported information must be corrected. Okay, so this was the question about the demonstrated improvements. And now the next question is about Scope 3 emissions. So remember, we talked about the Scope 3 emissions. You can see it in the picture here. The Scope 3 emissions are all the indirect emissions that are taking place, so to say, outside of your factory. And the question is, were your facility's annual Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions calculated during this reporting year? And this is an unscored question, but it may be scored soon. There is no plan for that or so, but usually unscored questions should become scored questions over time. So it is a good idea to begin trying to understand how to report on your Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions. And this is quite a significant exercise to do, actually, because as you can see also in the picture, the different Scope 3 categories, it's a very significant number of different Scope 3 categories. So there are a lot of calculations to be done. And there is also data that may not be readily available to you, but you might need to research it. And here you can see all the categories listed here in the table. And you can use, for example, a table like this to do your Scope 3 emission calculation. And now I know that offsetting is quite popular, and I think offsetting is a really good thing to do. But I just want to show you what I think is important when it comes to the hierarchy of energy and greenhouse gas savings. First of all, you should try to avoid. So if there are machines that you don't need, remove them and don't use them, because then you are avoiding to use that energy. Then reducing Scope 1 and Scope 2 energy consumption. So really do what you can do in the factory, switch off the lights, use LED lights, use servo motors, and all the other things you can do to reduce your actual consumption, because this for sure will reduce your footprint. And then you can begin using more renewable energy sources for Scope 1 and 2, and thereby you will also reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. So of course, if you are starting to use more solar generated energy, then your greenhouse gas emissions will be reduced, even though your actual energy consumption is not reduced. And then develop products that use less energy, avoid or reduce the Scope 3 emissions by avoiding reducing activities. So Scope 3 emissions are then the indirect emissions outside your factory. But of course, you can also see what can I do to improve the transport activities taking place? What can I do to make sure that the disposal of my products can be done in a better way that use less energy? Or and then the next one is to begin to use more renewable energy sources for Scope 3. So perhaps for transport, there are things you can do that. And then finally, to offset emissions. So it is not that effective really to start by just offset emissions, because then you might forget to do all the other things that are so important. And even just to move over to renewable energy is not the first step in my view. I think you should first try to reduce your actual energy footprint. And let me just correct this spelling mistake here. Yes, so this is the hierarchy that I think is really important to keep in mind when you develop your energy program. And now we come to the last question, and this is about the science-based targets. So the question is, did you set a science-based target according to the Science-Based Target Initiative? And if you know, is your facility preparing to set a science-based target to them according to the SBTI? And then, of course, you should suggest, you should have your documentation available and be able to upload and show that you have set a science-based target. And again, this question is not scored. And I want to give you some more additional information about the science-based target. So the science-based targets, this is the Science-Based Target Initiative is a partnership between a CDP, the UN Global Compact, the World Resources Initiative Institute, and the Worldwide Fund for Nature. And the goal is to limit global warming to below 2 degrees and hopefully even towards an 1.5 degree maximum warming. And emission reduction targets are defined that ensure transformational action. And you will see the savings that you need to do. We are talking about a range of 25 to 40, 50% within 10 to 15 years. That's a lot to reduce greenhouse gas emission that much. And therefore, the transformational action is really needed. And it is used to increase innovation, reduce regulatory uncertainty, strengthen investor confidence, and improve profitability and competitiveness. And again, so the energy area is really a low-hanging fruit, is a good business case. And here you can see lots of companies that have joined this initiative, and many companies have joined the Science-Based Target Initiative. Also in the apparel, fashion, footwear and textile sector. So what is a science-based target? Well, it is a clearly defined pathway to future-proof growth. It specifies how much and how quickly companies need to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and the targets need to be in line with what is necessary to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. So to limit the warming well below 2 degrees and even seek to limit warming to 1.5 degree. And now what are the steps? If you want to define your own science-based targets, you can write a commitment letter. You develop a target within 24 months after sending that letter. You submit your target for validation and you announce your targets. You start working towards the target, monitor, and you have also an annual public report. And there is more information available on this link here. And on the website of the Science-Based Targets, you can find a lot of additional information. So how do I set it? Well, I can set an absolute target or an intensity target. And an absolute could be, for example, to reduce a total scope 3 emissions by 10% from 2020 levels by 2025. Intensity could be to reduce scope 3 emissions per unit of revenue by 25% from 2020 levels by 2025. And then just briefly a few rows. The targets must cover a minimum of 5 years and a maximum of 15 years. No inclusion of targets that have already been achieved, so you cannot rely on historical results. And the base year should be most recent year for which data are available. So don't use a base year of 2013 when you are starting in 2021 to define your science-based targets. And the targets for scope 1 and 2 should be consistent with the trajectory, so basically with a line towards well below 2 degrees. You cannot count offsets, and you actually also cannot use avoided emissions. And targets to source renewable electricity are acceptable, and scope 3 must be included if it accounts for more than 40% of the scopes 1 to 3. But there is an exception for small and medium enterprises. They do not need to set a target, or at least not communicate it officially. And the numbers, the absolute contraction, here we are talking about a 2.5 annual linear reduction. That's quite a lot for well below 2 degree. And for a 1.5 degree trajectory, you have a minimum 4.3 of annual linear reduction. So you can multiply this and you will see this is a lot to reduce. And then we have about physical intensity and economic intensity as well, but I will not go into detail here. And because I want to move forward and show you also a few energy examples, here is 2 pies where you can see where the electricity is used in a composite textile plant and where the thermal energy is used in a composite textile plant. So you can see how the distribution is for the energy use. And then we have also a really good source, NRDC, which is today the Clean by Design project run by Apparel Impact Institute. They have a lot of great resources about best practice examples to save energy. And I really encourage you to go there and have a look at those examples. They are also very good at showing the business cases and the actual savings you can do also in terms of financial measures. So they are really good, very good examples. Okay. And with that, I would like to give you a very brief demo before we move on to the questions. And here you should now be able to see my portal with the Higg FEM. I'm already in the energy section here. And here at level 1, the first question, you need to select all sources of energy for your facility. And it's a very long list: coal, biomass, natural gas, diesel, etc. And you just respond yes or no, yes or no. So for example, here we say yes for propane. And then there is a question: does your facility track any of its energy use? If you say no, then you will just be closed. You will so to say be closed down. You will not be able to move forward at all. So you see that's it in this section. But of course, you will be tracking your energy use. So we respond yes here. And then what happens is that you get a pre-populated table where all the different energy sources that you have indicated that you have in your factory come up into this table. And then all the questions come here, and you just need to fill in this. And then at level 2 has your facility set baselines, and then you see the same table basically with a few different questions, but very similar. And you should then add your numbers here. And it goes on and on. So this is what it looks like online. And now I think we should go back and take some questions from you. So let me see if we have questions. So I have many questions if we will be sending out the materials after the webinar, and yes, we will. We will. Yeah. So here is a question: what evidence can be shown for the area with most energy used if we don't have an electrical submeter? Is an electrical submeter a must? No, it is not, but it is recommended that you have a certain degree of integration of meters in order to be able to really track your energy consumption. But the other evidence you can use is that you have a list of all your installed machines and motors and other installations in your factory, because there, in the information about the machine, you can see which installed power you have. And with that installed power, for example, you know that you have motors that are running every day all the time, then you will know what consumption they would have. And you can, this way, you can also compare and then decide or evaluate which machines or installations that use the most energy. If our facility did not have any greenhouse gas reduction for 2020, does it affect our score? It is not. That question is not yet scored. But of course, if you didn't reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, then you probably didn't reduce your energy consumption either. And there you will not get the score then, because that question about the energy reduction is scored. Is the greenhouse gas reduction targets accumulated for all energy consumption? Yes, this is a total consumption value. And the question for the target year will be 2020 or 2021. Yes, it should be in the future. So because the results for 2020 you will anyway look up. You will anyway have in the question number 6 for improvements. And here we are looking for a future looking target. So since you are reporting for the year of 2020, you should have then a target year of 2021, perhaps 2022, or even 2023. That's possible to have as well. So we have one question here. We have to set target on highest energy consuming process and show improvement on the same process to get full point. Yes, you should set targets so that you can reduce the total scope of at least 80% of your total energy consumption. So you may have several machines, and some of them are high consumers, but you cannot change them or substitute them or reduce their energy consumption. It is not that on a machine installation basis, you don't need to reduce the energy consumption of all those machines. No, it's okay to make sure that you cover 80% of your energy consumption. So if 50% of your energy consumption is electricity and 50% of your energy consumption is from diesel oil, for example, then you need to have targets that cover both of those sources in order to get the 80%, get the totals, the full score. If you only take one of them, then you have 50% and you will get half of the score, so partial score. There are lots of detailed questions here about the type of energy source. I will respond to those questions in written, and all of you will receive those questions and answers as well. Yes, there is one question about explaining more about downstream and upstream activities, and this is related then to scope 3. So if you go and look at that, the slide where I showed the scope 1, 2, and 3, and there is also one slide when you can see the list of the different activities. It goes very much into detail here if you want to do your calculations. So this is not part of this webinar to do that, because that would take also one day to just go into those details of the calculations here. How to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions? You can use the greenhouse gas protocol that I referenced earlier to do this. Yes, about choosing the baseline year. Yes, you can decide by yourself which baseline year you should take. But for example, if you start this year and want to set a baseline, I would suggest that you seek to take the baseline year of 2020, because it's the most recent year from which you have data. If you had very inconsistent production last year, then perhaps the 2019 year would be better. but it's free. There is no requirement from SAC that you pick a certain year, but it should be a recent year. So it doesn't make sense to take, as I said, 2013 as your baseline year if you are defining your targets now. Yes, we have several questions about receiving the presentation also from yesterday. You will receive it. That email will come out to everyone who is registered. Okay, good. So thanks a lot for all your questions. And the ones I didn't respond to now, I will respond to in a follow-up email. All right? So let me just go and give you an invitation to do verification with us for Higg FEM or for SLCP, and also we deliver also training courses. We can tailor make training courses for you, basic or advanced, or we can focus on one section. We can also consult you on how to complete the Higg FEM. And you can book a time with me here, or you can contact one of our local partners here. And we are ZTHC accredited training providers. And for the next webinars, you can register here, or for now, you can go to our website, to the blogs posts, and there you can register as well. And with that, this is the final slide with our team members. We are growing consistently. And with that, I would like to thank you so much for joining this webinar, for all your questions as well. And we will see each other next week, and then we will take the water section. So have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.